welcome, and thank you so much for joining the World Affairs Council of Connecticut to discuss the Russian challenge. And we are thrilled to have with us a very special guest, Dr. Fiona Hill, one of the nation's most knowledgeable and trusted experts on U.S.-Russian relations. Dr. Hill is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, having previously served as deputy assistant to President Trump and as senior director of the European and Russian Affairs on the National Security Council. Dr. Hill also has a new book due out in September. There is Nothing for You Here, Finding Opportunity in the 21st Century. So we all recommend we keep an eye out for that in September and pick up a copy when it's out. It's going to be another bestseller. So Dr. Hill, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I mean, I wish I was actually there in person, but it's great to be here in the virtual sense anyway.
Well, we're so grateful for your time, especially in this week, one of the busiest weeks for Russian news. For everyone out there, my name is Amanda Jolly, VP of Programs with the Council, and today's episode of State of the World is sponsored by Mr. Jeffrey Hoffman and the Hoffman Auto Group. We are so grateful for their support of the series and of the work of the World Affairs Council in making urgent community conversations around global issues possible. So thank you to Mr. Jeffrey Hoffman and the Hoffman Auto Group. I also want to say another thank you to Webster Bank and board member Dilton Dornalis, a longtime supporter of the council. And we know several of you are on the line this evening, so welcome. So we are honored to have Dr. Hill here today to discuss the future of the relationship between U.S. and Russia. So let's get started. I am pleased to turn it over to you, Megan. Megan Torrey, CEO of the World Affairs Council.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Dr. Hill. Our time is limited tonight, so I'm just going to jump right in. Our timing couldn't have been perfect because, as we all know, if anyone has been watching the news today, that President Biden left on his first overseas trip to attend the G7 and then go on to a summit next week with President Putin. And we know that the relationship between Putin and Biden could be described perhaps as cold, right? So in 2011, I think it was Biden that said directly to Putin, "I don't think you have a soul." And then in 2014, another dust up over Ukraine. And then, of course, we all remember at the beginning of Biden's presidency, the back and forth with each one calling the other a killer. So it sets us up really well for a summit next week. Dr. Hill, can you sort of describe how you see the bilateral relationship between Russia and the U.S.?
Well, unfortunately, we're in a state of confrontation and rather than just competition at this particular juncture. And it's also had a long tail behind it. Biden is in a bind, one might say, because he's having to basically deal with a lot of unfinished business with Russia that goes back not just to Crimea, which you just mentioned, in 2014, the annexation of Crimea, when he was vice president with President Barack Obama, but also since then, all of the things that have happened. Russia's intervention in Syria, that was also on their watch, of course, and then, the biggest shock of all in terms of what happening in the United States was the interference in this massive effort on the Russians' part to have some kind of influence over the outcome of the 2016 election. And of course, since then, we've also had assassinations and poisonings of dissidents and spies and former spies, attacks on our forces in Syria by Russian paramilitary cover operatives. We could just go on and on and on, a kind of a long litany of things that the Russians have done, hacking of critical infrastructure, continued attempts to mess about in the elections. And there's an awful lot of emphasis then on the part of the people around Biden, Congress and elsewhere, the people who watch Russia about, well, how does Biden deal with all of this? He has to find a way of moving forward with this summit and these other meetings into trying to somehow stabilize the relationship. The Biden administration has talked about wanting to have a more stable and predictable relationship with Russia, and we can talk about whether that's at all possible. But there's so much baggage. There's kind of a real overload here of the system. And there's also an awful lot of demand for Biden to take action to punish Russia for many of these transgressions of the past and the not so recent past and continuing of the present. So the relationship is at a really particularly fraught juncture. I think what Biden is trying to do is to use diplomacy as a tool, to have a face-to-face meeting, to take the measure of somebody he's already taken the measure of many times. I mean, he referred back to that meeting in 2011 when Biden looked at Putin and said, look, people are looking for your soul. I'm looking there and I don't see one. I think they got the measure of each other then. But this is the first time, obviously, Biden's been president in this period. I mean, Putin's been president now since 2020, and he's saying that he's going to be president out till 2036. Highly unlikely that President Biden will be president in 2036. So, I suppose Putin feels pretty confident that, he's been there, done that, and will continue to do that. And he will be trying to take advantage the whole time of this. And so there's, some jeopardy in this meeting. But it's also essential to be able to transmit messages and to put down markers about red lines in the relationship, rules of the road, rules of the game, and what you will tolerate and what you will not tolerate. So I personally think it's actually essential to have a meeting. Look, I mean, nobody's saying that President Biden shouldn't meet with President Xi of China, and the Chinese are committing all kinds of atrocities and have done all kinds of things that are inimical to our interests as well. We need to use diplomacy as a tool. We just have to be very careful about how this meeting is handled and what happens subsequently. My view would be not to have a press conference. I mean, it's one thing for Biden to be able to relate the interactions with Putin afterwards to the press and to the public, but we don't want to kind of expose ourselves to the kind of spectacle that we had back in the same sort of time frame 3 years ago now in 2018 in Helsinki, where the summit between Trump and Putin was completely disastrous because of a very ill-advised press conference.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Hill, you have said many times that sort of Russia perceives the United States as a threat, and that's a sort of essential way to understand the relationship. Can you expand on what you mean by that?
Well, unfortunately for Putin and the people around him, they're still in that mindset that the United States remains the main adversary as it was during the Cold War. And although, we're 30 years out from that now, as far as they are concerned, we maintain the capabilities and the capacity to hurt them. The conventional military forces, we now have precision long-range missiles that are conventional, but that can do incredible damage, for example, let alone the strategic nuclear arsenal that we have in the intermediate and tactical nuclear weapons. And, as far as Putin and the people around him are concerned, they believe that the United States is in the business of regime change, of overthrowing governments. And, part of the reason that they intervened in Syria was to stop the United States from getting rid of Assad. They're busy propping up Lukashenko in Belarus right now. They moved into Venezuela in support of Maduro, a couple of years ago, believing that we were in the process of trying to push him from power. Putin has been convinced for some period of time that the United States is out to get him. And he's actually right that there are people who are out to get him. There are people certainly in our firmament and in Europe and elsewhere who prefer not to have Putin in power. The Obama administration, many European leaders made it very clear that they actually quite enjoyed having Dmitry Medvedev as a sort of an interim president in between, President Putin's multiple terms back from 2007 to 2011, 2012. There's no surprise on the part of Putin that he's not very popular in the United States, and that Biden doesn't think particularly warmly or particularly positively about him. But I think Biden's view is that he doesn't have to like Putin to basically figure out how to manage this relationship, which is what he's looking for. Putin, however, I think, we want to manage the confrontation with Russia and to try to put it on a different footing. The Russians' whole point is they want to manage confrontation. They don't want the friction in the relationship to disappear. Because although the United States is still seen to be as the main opponent and the main threat, the Russians, just like everybody else, is wondering about what's going to happen in a world where China is the dominant player and the dominant system. And the Russians have really been trying very hard to forge a strategic partnership with China. We've been helping that, frankly, because we've been actually pushing them together, Russia and China, in ways that, perhaps have been unnatural, but now that they've both embraced it. And Russia's trying to prove to China, as well as to everyone else, that they're still the tough kid on the block, that they have every right to be one of the top three, if not one of the top two, countries, the superpower of the past, the great power, still of the future. But they do that by sparring with the United States, by showing that they're tough enough to be head to head with the US. The last thing they want to be is to be left with China and be perhaps pitted against China. So I think friction with the United States and managed confrontation with the United States is essential for Putin right now, to show China and everybody else that they're still the big kid on the block, but also for domestic purposes. because he's telling, the domestic population, we're under threat, we're under siege from the United States. The United States wants to put Russia down. The United States wants to overthrow me. The United States wants to oppress you. And so we're constantly mobilizing against the United States. Otherwise, there's no excuse for him to put Alexei Navalny in jail, to clamp down on opposition, or to even say that he needs to be in power till 2036. Because if, the world is a safe place, why does he have to be president indefinitely, for example?
Exactly. So I'm going to, so on State of the World, we have what's called the 5, and it's a speed round. And I'm going to ask you to sort of expand on what you just said just a little bit more. So if you were the Kremlin and you're preparing your 5 top priorities going into the summit next week, what would the 5 top priorities be?
For the Kremlin?
Yep.
Yeah, first of all, to show that you're still, the major player and that you're an equal of the United States. The other priority is to actually be able to take that beyond this summit. So the Russians are looking to start or to continue strategic stability talks that they've had with the US in the past, to be able to talk, about arms control. The third thing is they want to have some commitment to really being able to engage and have talks on arms control, on nuclear weapons and the future of nuclear weapons, what's going to happen now that the United States has pulled out of INF. The fourth is, look, I think they want to take advantage of the moment and to continue to be able to emphasize that the United States is weak. So I do think that we have to look out for some mischief. They'll want to kind of come out of there being able to show that they've maybe to get one over, pulled a fast one on the United States. They did that very effectively at Helsinki, kind of that summit with Trump. And, fifth, I do think that they want to get some kind of measure of, Biden and the team around him, to see what they can leverage and to see, kind of how they can deal with them in the future. So getting the measure of the people that they're engaging with, those would be my 5. I'm sure that if I thought about it a bit more, I could come up with some more as well. But anyway, that's a very quick 5.
Great. Thank you so much. My next question is a great follow-up. It comes from my counterpart, my friend, the head of the Atlanta World Affairs Council, Ambassador Charles Shapiro. So Ambassador Shapiro was asking if you were still at the NSC, you and your staff would have been the ones preparing the brief for President Biden. So what would be in that brief? And he actually predicted that, would you think that you would see Putin trying to create some mischief or something he would do in the lead up? And he points out that even today, Alexei Navalny's political movement was deemed by a Russian court to be, extremist. So
exactly. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you're going to expect them to see. I mean, so look, if you look back to Helsinki, in the days before Helsinki, the United States indicted several officers from the GRU, the Russian military intelligence, for the operation to interfere in our elections. What did Putin do at Helsinki? He suggested that the United States and Russia could avail themselves of a mutual assistance, legal assistance treaty. And then, the United States would, of course, be welcome under that treaty to interrogate those officers. But of course, there was a twist. He said it's mutual, and then we would also like to be able to interrogate or question some Americans. And, that turns out to be Americans who were involved in the passing of the Magnitsky Act in Congress that put sanctions on Russians for human rights violations, named after Sergei Magnitsky, the lawyer for Bill Browder, who had then lost all of their assets in a hostile takeover, and who then died in jail. And so this caused outrage, and that became, along with all kinds of other things at the press conference, and all that everybody was talking about. So, the Russians managed to throw everyone on the back foot and to get Americans all arguing and fighting with each other and forgetting, what we'd all been about, which was trying to hold Russians to account for interfering in our elections. So, we are no doubt going to raise the issue of Navalny, not just the, basically the disassembling, the outlawing of his organization, but the fact that Navalny himself is being imprisoned on trumped-up charges. He just celebrated his 45th birthday in jail, and all these other, abuses of political prisoners. There are also 2 American citizens in jail, Paul Whelan and Trevor Reed, 2 former Marines, who the Russians have taken hostage, essentially, and they want to trade for Victor Bout, the famous or infamous arms dealer. They made that crystal clear to us. So we're going to have to also press the case of our own American citizens. What are they going to do? Putin's already made it clear, just like the ambassador is surmising. They're going to raise the fact that we are somehow trampling over the rights of those who were detained after the events of January 6th and the storming of the Capitol, saying that these were just petitioners who were wanting to bring, their particular, political grievances to the attention of congressmen. I mean, they're just totally and utterly playing with our politics deliberately. So that would be, one thing that we have to be very cautious. And we have to be cautious, not just our president, who is going to meet with Putin to look out for this, but also our press. Don't rise to the bait. And that relates me to a second caution: don't have a press conference. I mean, I don't know whether they've decided to do this, but why give Putin a platform to try to do things like this, like we did in the past? We didn't used to have press conferences in the Soviet period. We don't have to have a press conference. All that is a, kind of a platform for mischief. We can, basically relate what we got out of this and talk to our press on the way back. I mean, the other thing is, kind of really going through what Putin's objectives would be. He wants to be seen as an equal to the United States, but he's not going to back off trying to hurt us whenever he can. He wants to sit at the table and kick us under the table at the same time. And Putin has other priorities other than the United States, domestic priorities, just as we do, but his is, keeping his opposition in check. He also wants to be seen to be a major player because, I've already mentioned they're worried about China down the line. He wants to be seen to be treated with respect, but he also wants to disrespect us in some way, getting back to the mischief. So, we're going to have to tread very carefully with this. But I do think that we want to set, and this is what, I hope that President Biden will be able to do, set down some rules of the game, some red lines to basically say, look, these things are not permissible. And if you do something on these fronts, and cyber, attacking our critical infrastructure, meddling in our politics, a whole list here, we will take action. You may not know, it won't might not be public, but you will know after the fact we've taken action. We'll be sending you a very strong message. I mean, we need to launch an offensive defense. We just shouldn't be talking about it all the time. But President Biden should be making it clear that, certain things will be impermissible. But at the same time, we want to, basically have degrees of predictability of this relationship to manage this confrontation. And in that regard, we'd like to set up a set of predictable meetings so that people are not going into a mass hysteria every time a US president meets with a Russian president, just like they're not when, we meet with the Chinese, who are doing some pretty egregious things as well. But meetings to talk about strategic stability and arms control between the professionals, our meetings between the Secretary of State, Defense, chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, including our intel chiefs, because the Russians are really trying to poke and prod us all the time on the intel side, so that those messages can be passed as well. We mustn't look at diplomacy as an appeasement mechanism or as a gift. Diplomacy is a tool. So these meetings, these are episodic events. They're ways of taking the temperature of the relationship, passing on messages, but also regularizing and trying to stabilize a relationship and manage a very difficult confrontational relationship.
All very complicated. So I wanted to bring in a question from one of our board members, Art House, who's listening, and he sends his regards. You worked with him at the ODNI. He wants to get your assessment about the situation in Belarus. On one hand, Putin doesn't want to appear to embrace Lukashenko too warmly, but on the other hand, Putin profoundly fears Lukashenko being overthrown by populist forces and the pressure that would put on him. So how do you think the U.S. should handle the situation in Belarus?
Well, this is a very difficult one. I mean, as you said, all of these things are pretty complicated. We have to be aware that, what Putin is going to try to do is keep Lukashenko in place, but potentially also try to kind of find a way of having a replacement lined up for Lukashenko that's someone, to Russia's needs or Russia's suiting. Because Belarus is part of a kind of symbolic union state with Russia. It's also, more importantly, part of Russia's defensive structures. So Belarus is the land bridge to Kaliningrad, the exclave of Russia, sandwiched between Poland and the Baltic states. And, you see an awful lot of exercises that Russia conducts on Belarusian territory. They're not just confined to Russia's western regions. And just as, this question is suggesting, Martha, it's basically Russia sees an incredibly bad precedent in Lukashenko being ousted by grassroots movement, opposition movement, probably have lots of evidence that he wasn't fairly elected. because Lukashenko has been in power for a mere 27 years. And Putin's suggesting he wants to be in power for 36. So if Lukashenko has worn out his welcome after 27 years and is going to be removed by the street and by protests, this sets a very bad precedent for Putin. And so, for the United States, and how do we handle this? It's very carefully. First of all, we don't want to sort of sell Belarus down the river and its sovereignty. We want to kind of figure out a way of making it clear that Belarus is still a sovereign power. But, we also can't let Lukashenko get away with what he's done recently, like, basically diverting and bringing down Ryan aircraft from flying from one European capital to another, so that they can basically arrest and take off a Belarusian dissident. And we have to make sure that that is seen to be not permissible. So we have to work very closely with our European allies on this to kind of make sure that we're sending very strong messages, but we're also going to have to play it very cautiously, because the Russians have also now shown how very clearly they have a deep vested interest in Belarus. I think the only way we can approach Belarus is to do it together with our allies, NATO allies, European Union allies as well, and it's particularly with the Baltic states and Poland and the other neighbours of Belarus. And that includes Ukraine too, because Belarus is a great threat to Ukraine and Ukraine's sovereignty. We've already seen what Russia has done and continues to do with Ukraine.
Excellent. So I'm going to try to combine these next two questions together, and they're about entering an era of great power competition. So two of the domains that are going to be extremely competitive in the future. So cyber and space. Do you see Russia becoming the next great cyber superpower? And it seems as if space is the one frontier where we could still sort of work together on. Although yesterday, the Russian space chief said, if you don't get rid of the sanctions, we're building our own space station. So what do you think the future is for these two domains, cyber and space?
Well, in terms of space, Russia was always, a great space power. And I think Russia is a little discomforted now that China is getting in the act. But look, and we've got Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos in on the act on space as well. I mean, we have now a whole new domain of private sector space exploration. And that Russia doesn't have that. And right now, China doesn't have that either. So I think, space is getting blown open. Men or private men are going where they didn't go before. I mean, this is like Jeff Bezos and his brother about to launch themselves off. I mean, it's totally fascinating sets of developments. So I'm sure the Russians are watching that and also thinking, hang on, this is getting a bit more complicated. But it's very clear that this used to be an area of great cooperation. And, the Russians are making it clear that they're willing to cooperate with the Chinese, but they must be very concerned because the Chinese have also got a Mars rover. The Chinese have been to the dark side of the moon. And, Russia, does Russia really have the wherewithal to build its own space station without China, honestly, contributing? And, kind of while we've got private sector efforts here too. So I think, space is becoming complicated, but it's very clear that Russia still wants to play there. And it's not just, space exploration, but it's also, frankly, satellites, space-based missiles. That's where the private sector isn't going to come in. But, Russia is still making it very clear that they see that as a realm where, they want to be taken seriously. Cyber, they're already a cyber superpower. And in fact, we're seeing them acting out to get our attention because under the previous administration, President Trump was also saying, no, it's China and North Korea or Iran that's, hacking or making problems. And Russia wants us to know, no, it's them. And that they can do many things. They can hack our emails, they can be everywhere at once. They could be in here with us right now. They could be in our command and control systems. They could be breaking down our pipelines and, holding things ransomware for criminals for hire. They want us to take them seriously. They want cyber to be part of the discussion. They want to be a cyber superpower, and in many respects, they already are.
So I know we're running out of time, but I want to close with a question about Putin, and I'm going to bring in a question from Scott Wilson. So you wrote a book about Putin, and you're uniquely positioned to have met with him several times. So if we're looking at the future and at a day when Putin won't be at the helm of Russia, what does Russia look like?
Well, it's a really great question. And, obviously, Putin, by giving himself till 2036, wants to be the person who says what Russia looks like, which is, kind of someone who's his handpicked successor, doing something like more of the same. I mean, right now, the people around Putin have a vested interest in keeping him in place. But, we all have our own life cycle, right? I mean, we can't all live forever. We can kind of push the clock out as long as possible. And Putin's been making, a lot of hay out of Biden's age, but, he should be careful because by 2036, he'll be 84. So he's already saying that he's going to be already in office when he's 78, like President Biden is. Basically, what are the alternatives? The alternative is someone from Putin's inner circle, entourage, a younger version of him, kind of carrying things forward. Or there's Alexei Navalny in the opposition. And what's interesting is Navalny, I mean, of course, he's been in jailed and we don't know, how this is going to play out. Thank goodness he didn't, die yet in prison. But I mean, clearly Putin and those guys have made it very clear to the hit squads that they wanted to take him out and they'd be very happy to see him die. Navalny isn't calling for a Russian revolution or a complete overturning of the system. He's talking about removing the kleptocratic, corrupt clique around Putin and, perhaps, having Russia return to something more of what it was at the very beginning of when Putin started out, putting, more economic reforms and others in place and trying to sort of strengthen the state and the economy in a more, a less corrupt, less thieving and, conniving way. If we get another Putin for somebody coming from the security services, I mean, sadly, we'll see more of the same. But look, we've seen in every symbol system that leadership matters and the style and the approach of the person at the top. I mean, think about all of our previous presidents and how different they've been, even though there's been a lot of continuity in policy and continuity in, the way that the United States does things. The type of person, the style of the person, that person's background does count for something. So, it really depends on who actually replaces Putin. We saw, Gorbachev really make some major changes. I mean, he actually lost a country. Putin doesn't want to be the person who does that. We see in Venezuela, Maduro not being that different, in fact, being much worse than Chavez. But, in other places, we've often had surprises about, the leader that comes forward. So there is that element of the person and the personality that has to be factored in. So I can't say, how Russia exactly looks post-Putin.
Well, it'll be exciting to see and to watch. And I know that all of us are going into next week with our eyes wide open, having heard from you tonight. And so, Dr. Hill, we thank you so much.
No, thanks so much. I mean, we have to have reasonable expectations and not, kind of hype this up too much, because this is an episode in, what is a long and very difficult relationship. And it's a way of trying to figure out how you manage the confrontation with Russia. But I appreciate having the chance to talk to everyone. And look, if you guys come up with some solutions in the next section, let me know.
We'll take notes for you, Dr. Hill. And so I hope that we do see you in Hartford sometime soon. It would be great to see you.
I would love to. And it'd be great to be able to talk to everyone in person. And, thanks very much. And, I'm sorry that I can't, be part of the next discussion with everyone as well.
And today and over the next week, and just always how in demand and how busy your schedule is. So thank you so much for spending time with us tonight.
Thanks for having me. All the best wishes to everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.